broken bones are, they're strangely comforting, I mean, in a weird way.
Well, right. Yeah. Comforting is a funny word for it, but I get what you mean.
Like if you fall and your arm swells up, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and well, there it is, right? A jagged white line on this glowing screen.
Yeah. You can actually see the problem.
Exactly. The doctor points to it, you look at it together, and it's entirely visible. It's quantifiable. It's basically an engineering problem with a super clear solution.
It's biological mathematics. When you apply a cast, time passes, and the bone knits back together. The etiology is clear, and the outcome is predictable.
Right.
We build our entire sense of medical security on that exact visibility.
Right. But, and this is what we're getting into today for this deep dive, what happens when that x-ray machine is forced to scan, like, the human soul?
Oh, wow.
Because when the crisis isn't a fractured radius, but an absolute, totally invisible spiritual collapse, that's a whole different ballgame. So today, we are looking at two cases of hitting rock bottom. We are examining what happens when the very source you always relied on for hope goes completely terrifyingly silent.
Yeah, it's a profound topic.
It really is. So for you listening, our mission today is pretty specific. We're mapping the arguments, the theology, and the ultimate takeaways from two people who found themselves plunged into what they both literally described as an abyss.
And we are bridging a pretty massive gap in time to do this, too.
We really are.
Like, we're looking at a theological commentary on one of the most relentlessly bleak poems from the ancient world, Psalm 88, and we're placing it right alongside a modern, deeply physical, poetic testimony from a guy who survived a near-fatal bloodstream infection.
Two totally vastly different eras.
Right. Two different mediums, but they are mapping the exact same psychological and spiritual topography.
But just to be totally clear right out of the gate, because, I mean, I know the phrase absolute spiritual collapse sounds like a really tough listen. This isn't a dive into despair just for the sake of being depressing.
No, not at all.
We are dissecting the anatomy of that despair to understand the mechanics of survival. Like, how do people actually process divine silence? How do they argue with it?
Right. It's an autopsy of a crisis, sure.
Yeah.
But it's one that is actively looking for the heartbeat. We want to extract the underlying theological logic that operates when the lights just completely go out.
Yeah.
Because if you listening have ever felt completely isolated, or, if you've watched someone else go through an inexplicable season of suffering, the texts we have in front of us offer a really profound framework for understanding what is actually happening in the dark.
Absolutely. So let's start in the ancient world. Let's, strip away the modern hospital monitors for a second and look at the raw historical framework of this experience. The source commentary we have focuses on an author named Heman the Ezrahite.
Yes.
So who is this guy, and why is his particular flavor of suffering preserved in ancient literature?
Well, Heman the Ezrahite is an incredibly fascinating figure. In the broader biblical context, the Ezrahites were actually known for their wisdom. Heman himself is mentioned elsewhere in the ancient texts as a musician, a sage, someone who possessed a deep, really intricate understanding of the world.
Okay, so he's not just some random guy. He's highly respected.
Exactly. Yet in Psalm 88, all that wisdom doesn't insulate him from suffering at all. Our source commentary notes that he sounds remarkably like Job-like, the absolute archetype of the righteous sufferer whose life just inexplicably falls apart.
And what's immediately striking to me is the presentation of his crisis. Because this isn't just, a diary entry found stuffed in a drawer somewhere. The text actually comes with a specific technical musical direction. It's written in a style called Mashalath Linath. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
You are, yeah. And that phrase is totally crucial for understanding the cognitive dissonance of the text. Markalath translates roughly to sickness or disease, and Linoth means to afflict or to humble. It's literally an instruction for the choir director.
Wait. So the musical direction itself literally means a sickness to afflict. Like, he wrote a song about a panic attack or about his physical and spiritual deterioration and then just handed it to a choir director to perform in public.
Exactly. He really did.
Yeah.
And that tells us something profound about ancient communities.
Yeah.
I mean, today when we experience deep despair or like a massive crisis of faith, our modern instinct is to hide it.
Oh, for sure. We isolate. We put on a brave face.
Right. We feel shame. But Heman takes his absolute unfiltered terror and sets it to a melody meant to be shared in communal worship. It was likely a dirge, performed in a minor key, meant to be sung mournfully. But the mere fact that it is a song means his isolation was, ironically, meant to be witnessed by the community.
Wow, that's That's a huge paradigm shift. Let's look at the actual situation he is documenting, though, because the commentary points out that Heman is desperately seeking contact with Yahweh, the Hebrew name for God, but he is getting absolutely zero response, like nothing.
Total radio silence.
Right. He describes himself as being trapped in the darkness of abandonment, and the physical toll mirrors the spiritual toll.
It really does.
Yeah.
The source material aligns his physical and emotional suffering with another famous lament, which is Psalm 22. So Heman isn't just having like a bad day. He says, O Lord God who delivers me, by day I cry out, and at night I pray before you. Listen to my prayer, pay attention to my cry for help. It is a relentless 24-hour cycle of petition that is just met with a total vacuum.
Yeah, and he says his life is so filled with troubles that he is ready to enter Sheol. And for you listening who might not be familiar with ancient Near Eastern cosmology, Sheol is often translated as the grave or the pit. But it's not like hell in the medieval fire and brimstone sense with pitchforks, is it?
No, it's not. In the ancient Hebrew mindset, Sheol is the shadowy underworld of the dead. It's a place of dust, of fading memory, where all the vibrancy of life just ceases.
Kind of like a gray waiting room.
Yeah, exactly. It is the ultimate destination for all mortals, but it's a place defined primarily by its lack of vitality and, most importantly, its lack of connection to the divine. And Heman feels the gravitational pull of this place so strongly that it is actively destroying his social life in the present.
Right, because his friends and neighbors are entirely freaked out by his condition. I mean, the commentary notes that his fellow human beings basically consider him past helping. He writes, "They treat me like those who descend into the grave. I am like a helpless man adrift among the dead."
Yeah.
He literally calls himself an appalling sight. He feels totally trapped, unable to break free.
And you have to think about the sociology of illness in the ancient world here, right?
Yeah.
Severe physical affliction was often viewed as a sign of divine cursing. So if you were suffering intensely, the community often assumed you had done something to deserve it.
Like karma, almost.
Sort of, yeah. So standing near you was socially and spiritually dangerous for them. Heman isn't just dying. He is being actively shunned by the very people who should be comforting him, which just completely compounds his sense of abandonment.
Now, this brings us to a massive psychological contradiction in the text, and it's something the commentary really hones in on. Heman believes God is the ultimate cause of his distress. Like he writes, "You place me in the lowest regions of the pit. Your anger bears down on me, and you overwhelm me with all your waves." He is directly pointing the finger at God for throwing him into the abyss. But simultaneously, and this is the wild part, he treats God as his only hope for survival.
It is the defining paradox of the believer's crisis. It really is.
It makes me think of like a rip current. Imagine you're at the beach, right? You wade out a bit too far, and suddenly this massive invisible force grabs you and just pulls you out to sea. Now imagine you're out there drowning and you see a lifeguard. But in this scenario, it feels like the lifeguard is the one generating the waves.
Right, holding you under.
Exactly. The lifeguard is actively holding your head under the water. If you truly believe the lifeguard is the one trying to drown you, why on earth would your instinct be to keep crying out to that same lifeguard for a rescue tube?
Right. It completely defies simple logic, but it perfectly captures the theology of covenant. Because Heman is bound to Yahweh, the source commentary actually points out a brilliant physiological metaphor that Heman uses. It says his weakening eyes due to oppression produces contradictions in his view of God.
His weakening eyes, so the physical exhaustion, the sheer trauma of it, is literally blurring his spiritual vision.
Precisely. His circumstances are dictating his theology in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's creating massive friction. He feels the wrath of God pushing him down, yet he knows the character of God from his heritage, the God of deliverance. So his trauma is causing major cognitive dissonance.
He's torn in half.
Yeah. He believes God is angry, pushing him toward death, making him this negative example for everyone else. Yet, what is his reflex? He clings. He says, "I call out to you, O Lord, all day long. I spread out my hands in prayer to you."
I really want to push back on this, though. Like, if his eyes are weakening, if his theology is getting scrambled by his trauma, isn't there a point where the clinging just becomes pathological?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm knocking on a door for a decade and no one answers, eventually sanity dictates I stop knocking and walk away. Why doesn't Heman just accept the silence and go, okay, we're done here?
Well, because in Heman's worldview, there is nowhere else to walk. And the commentary emphasizes this deeply. The logic Heman is wrestling with is dizzying. If God seeks to restore the broken, then what is the purpose of ignoring a desperate prayer? If God is the ultimate deliverer, why is he acting like a destroyer? But, and this is the key to stop knocking on the door, is to concede that the universe is just chaotic and meaningless.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By continuing to knock, even in his anger, even in his absolute despair, Heman is insisting that there is a moral order. He's insisting that there is a listener on the other side of the door, even if that listener is currently ignoring him.
So the very act of complaining to God is actually a profound act of faith that God exists and ought to be doing something about this.
Exactly. It is a holy stubbornness.
A holy stubbornness. I love that phrase. And that maps so perfectly onto the human experience today, even outside of a strictly religious context.
Yeah.
You know, when someone hits that absolute bottom, when the medical treatments fail, when the bank accounts drain, when the social circles just evaporate because people can't handle your grief, there is that agonizing space of total isolation.
Oh, absolutely.
And Heman is writing from the perspective of someone who feels like a corpse that has just been forgotten by the universe, cut off from all power and agency.
Socially abandoned, physically deteriorating, and spiritually met with total, absolute silence. But the turning point in the commentary and in the text itself is how Heman decides to wield that silence.
Yes. Because he gets highly rhetorical. He doesn't just sit in the mud and take it. He starts building an argument. He shifts from being like a passive victim to acting like a defense attorney who's cross-examining a silent witness.
Right, because the fear of Sheol for Heman isn't just biological death. The source commentary makes a critical distinction here. The terror of the grave isn't just the cessation of his heartbeat. It is the theological consequence of the grave.
Explain that a bit more. What exactly is the theological consequence of dying for an ancient Israelite?
Well, our source states his primary trouble is the prospect of being remembered no more by God and being cut off from God's power. Heman says he feels like corpses lying in the grave whom you remember no more. In the ancient Near Eastern framework, memory is active.
Active memory. Okay.
Right. To be remembered by God means God is actively acting on your behalf. To be forgotten is to be severed from the source of all vitality. So Sheol is a realm of silence, a place where the vibrant, active, reciprocal relationship between the creator and the created just goes dark.
So he pivots from just lamenting his physical pain to interrogating the logic of God's silence. Like, he peppers God with these intense rhetorical questions in verses 10 through 12. Listen to this rapid-fire questioning. It's so good. Do you accomplish amazing things for the dead? Do the departed spirits rise up and give you thanks? Is your loyal love proclaimed in the grave, or your faithfulness in the place of the dead? Are your amazing deeds experienced in the dark region, or your deliverance in the land of oblivion?
He is leaning really hard into the theology of utility here.
It's a complete courtroom drama. I picture it like the judge is sitting behind the bench, completely stone-faced, totally unresponsive, and Heman is pacing the floor, making this desperate but incredibly sharp logical plea. He's looking at the judge and saying, look, you created humans to praise you. You want your loyal love proclaimed. You want your amazing deeds experienced and witnessed, but I can't do any of that if I am a corpse. You get absolutely zero return on your investment if you let me die.
It's brilliant. And the audacity of it is striking, isn't it? As the source commentary points out, Heman asks these rhetorical questions, fully expecting a no answer. No, God doesn't accomplish amazing things for the dead to witness. No, departed spirits in Sheol don't rise up and give thanks.
But wait, if he knows the answer is no, isn't he essentially just taunting God? Like, hey, God, you're going to lose your best worshiper if you don't step in. That sounds almost manipulative. How does the commentary distinguish between a man who is bitterly taunting the divine and a man who is exercising genuine faith?
It's a great question, and the distinction really lies in the underlying motivation. The theological implication the commentary draws out is that Heman's desperation to praise, to thank, and to honor God this side of the grave is the driving force of the entire argument. It isn't a taunt at all. It's a desperate plea for utility.
Utility. He just wants to be useful.
Precisely. Even in absolute, utter despair, his primary concern isn't just pain relief. He isn't saying, save me so I can go back to my comfortable life and ignore you. He is demanding an explanation for why his deliverer is rejecting him, because that rejection is preventing him from fulfilling his core purpose, which is to praise and honor God in the land of the living.
The text says, Heman does not accept his plight as final. And then it notes, he asks for an explanation why his deliverer appears to reject him. He actually says, as for me, I cry out to you, O Lord. In the morning my prayer confronts you. O Lord, why do you reject me and pay no attention to me? That word confronts is so aggressive. It's like he is getting up every single morning and throwing his prayer like a rock at a closed window.
Right. And yet, as the commentary notes, the window doesn't open. His cries make no immediate impact whatsoever. There's no sudden shaft of light, no miraculous healing. In fact, the trouble just compounds. He says he has been on the verge of death since his youth, subjected to horrors, numb with pain.
Numb with pain, surrounded by terrors like water all day long. And then, and this is wild, we hit the end of the psalm. And this is exactly where Psalm 88 earns its reputation as the darkest chapter in ancient literature. Verse 18, the final line. You cause my friends and neighbors to keep their distance. Those who know me leave me alone in the darkness.
And that's it. That's the end of the song.
No neat bow. No sudden rescue narrative where he praises God for the deliverance at the last second. Just a hard cut to black. The darkness literally wins the chapter.
It really appears that God's rejection of Heman is final, with absolutely no resolution. The ancient text forces the reader to just sit in the pitch black right alongside him.
It's deeply unsettling. And honestly, for anyone listening who has been in a long-term crisis, it's probably a little too familiar. That feeling of ending the day, ending the prayer, doing everything you were supposed to do, and nothing changes. The silence is still there.
Yeah, it's brutal.
But this concept of the land of oblivion and utter isolation isn't just some ancient poetic device, right? Because if we strip away the sand and the sandals, the exact same neurological and spiritual shutdown happens in modern hospital wards, which is why we are pulling in our second source today.
Exactly. We are moving from the ancient poetry of Heman the Ezrahite to the very modern, very medical reality of a man named Randy Johnson.
Yeah, Randy wrote a poetic testimony titled Trip to Sheol, and the backstory provided in our source notes is chillingly straightforward. Randy contracted a severe staph infection that got directly into his bloodstream.
Which is a remarkably dangerous medical emergency. I mean, sepsis from a staph infection moves incredibly fast. The endotoxins cross the blood-brain barrier, the body's inflammatory response goes into overdrive, and organs can just begin to shut down. Randy describes it as a situation that could go either way. He was on the absolute brink of death.
And during this crisis, while he is physically lying in a hospital bed, cognitively and spiritually, he experiences what he calls a universe of darkness. He actually questions in his own notes whether it was an out-of-body experience or just an elaborate drug-induced dream. But the sensory details he records are deeply fascinating because they map almost perfectly onto Heman's ancient fears of Sheol.
They really do. Let's analyze the imagery in Randy's poem, because he is essentially documenting a modern descent into the land of oblivion. He writes, more awake than ever before in a universe of darkness. The cold grips me to my core, but without a body, shiverless.
Just think about the paradox of that line. The cold grips me to my core, but without a body, shiverless. It is the ultimate sensory deprivation combined with a profound sense of spiritual nakedness. He's experiencing an environment, but he has no physical apparatus to respond to.
Right. He notes there are no heavenly bodies, no light at all, only layers of blackened fog, total silence. He says no sound is heard, and yet he sees figures moving, disturbing this bog. It's a space totally devoid of the physics of the living world.
And he loses his identity completely. He writes, I am disturbed, but who am I? I don't even know my name. Who put me in this frigid sty, and why do I feel no pain? He can't move. He feels bound, frozen. It's the complete dissolution of the ego.
Which naturally raises an important question regarding the nature of such extreme experiences.
Yeah.
The modern clinical mind immediately looks for a biochemical explanation for the dissolution of the ego and the feeling of a shiverless void.
Right, and I have to play the skeptic here for a moment for the listener. Look, Randy himself admits in the poem and his accompanying notes that this could very well be a drug-induced dream. He was battling a systemic bloodstream infection, his brain was likely starved of oxygen at points, and he was undoubtedly pumped full of heavy hospital narcotics.
For sure.
So how much theological weight can we really put on an ICU hallucination? Isn't this just the human brain misfiring under extreme biological duress?
Well, that is the necessary clinical pushback. It's highly probable that hypoxia and heavy medication provided the biochemical scaffolding for this experience. But the theological crux of the source material isn't about medically verifying whether his soul actually physically detached from his body and went to a geographic location called Sheol.
Okay, so what is it about?
It's about how the human consciousness processes the absolute void, and more importantly, the action Randy takes within that darkness.
So it's less about the origin of the dream and more about how he responds to the dream itself.
Exactly. Randy acknowledges the drugs. He says maybe it was all just a dream, but he immediately follows that with, but man, it eclipsed those drugs. The subjective reality of the experience, the terror and the isolation, was more profound and more real to him than the chemical intervention that may have triggered it.
It felt more real than reality.
And look at his instinctive reaction when he realizes he is captive in this frigid sty with no memory of his own name. He doesn't just passively dissolve into the black fog. He exercises spiritual agency. He writes, "It is a dream I tell myself, but how can I escape it? I'll cry out to the Lord himself. Please, free my captive spirit."
Which is the exact same reflex we saw 3,000 years earlier. Heman says, "I call out to you, O Lord, all day long." Randy says, "I'll cry out to the Lord himself."
Exactly.
Even when his brain is chemically compromised, even when he is stripped of his memory, his body, the sensation of light and sound, the deepest, most fundamental reflex of the believer is to cry out into the void for deliverance. It's like it's hardwired into the system deeper than his own name.
And that cry is the exact moment the modern medical reality comes crashing back in.
The awakening. The transition back to the physical world in his testimony is incredibly visceral. The source notes describe how he is pulled out of the blackened fog. And it isn't an angel appearing in the void, it's a nurse. A nurse awakens him by tapping a glass thermometer against his clenched teeth in a dark hospital room, saying, "Sir, sir, take your temperature."
Notice what immediately returns as proof of life, though. He writes, "Oh my God, the pain is back," and now we start to shiver. The shivering returns. The pain returns.
Pain as a symptom of survival.
Exactly. His memory is still deeply fragmented. I mean, he mentions later that he couldn't even write his own signature because his memory was still on leave. So the cognitive fog is very much still there.
But the crucial shift is his awareness that he actually survived. He says, "Because of drugs, my senses lack, but at least some light, a sliver, and now I knew I did not die. The staff, it did not kill me." He interprets his survival not just as good luck with antibiotics, but as a direct response to that internal cry. "From the darkest pit, he heard my cry and chose to give me mercy."
So Randy's trip to Sheol ended with a literal return to the land of the living. He experienced the terrifying architecture of the darkness, he cried out, and he was delivered back into a hospital room, guided by the clink of a thermometer and a tiny sliver of light.
Which sets up the absolute most mind-bending connection between these two sources, because we know Randy survived, right? We have the poem, the medical context, the aftermath. But what about Heman? We left him in verse 18, sitting in absolute darkness, abandoned by his friends, with God completely silent.
This is where the source commentary introduces a fundamental shift in how we read the ancient text. It's a massive theological plot twist regarding Heman's actual fate.
Okay, lay it out. Because when I first read the notes on this, it completely changed how I view the whole concept of unresolved suffering.
The commentary points out that while the text of Psalm 88 ends in darkness, Heman's rejection by God was only apparent.
Apparent, meaning it felt final. It looked final to everyone around him, but it wasn't actual rejection. It's like uncovering a lost survival diary in the Arctic or something. You're reading the entries and they just get bleaker and bleaker. The last entry says, "The fire's out, the food is gone, the storm is burying the tent, this is the end." If you stop reading there, you naturally assume the author froze to death. But then you close the diary, look at the spine, and realize the book was published by a major press and the author wrote a foreword 10 years later.
Yes, the existence of the artifact is proof of survival.
That's it. The commentary puts it so plainly. The psalmist's rejection was only apparent for he lived to write about it. That is the point. Heman lived to write the song down. He lived to hand it to the choir director. He lived to see the musical instructions added, which means the darkness did not swallow him whole. God's silence in the middle of the trial was not the end of the narrative.
Which totally changes the entire hermeneutical, like the framework of interpretation for the text. If we analyze the theological implications of this survival, it radically reshapes how we view the utility of suffering. Heman's agony, as brutal and confusing as it was not a cosmic mistake.
Even though God didn't give him an itemized list of reasons while he was actually going through it.
Right. The source commentary makes a very bold, definitive claim here. God had a plan bigger than Heman knew, and a place in it reserved most carefully for him.
Reserved most carefully for him. That phrasing implies incredible intentionality. It means the pain wasn't just random chaos.
It was purposeful. And the critical takeaway here requires a massive shift in perspective. When Heman was in the middle of his horrific ordeal, losing his friends, his health, his sense of God's presence, he naturally thought he was experiencing his story. He thought, this is my life, my pain, my end. But the commentary argues that he was actually chosen to write a vital, permanent piece of God's story.
Wow. He was generating canonical material, his questions, his feeling of utter abandonment, his accusations against God, all of it was being captured and preserved for antiquity.
There was a carefully reserved place for Heman's specific flavor of suffering to serve a purpose for millions of readers across millennia. Every single person who has ever felt abandoned by God, who has felt the silence of heaven and stumbled upon Psalm 88, has found a companion in their darkest night. If Heman had just been instantly healed on day one, if the lifeguard had just cost him the rescue tube immediately, we wouldn't have the text.
We wouldn't have this profound, divinely sanctioned articulation of faith in the dark. It's a staggering thought. The worst, most isolating moments of his life were the exact raw materials that made his legacy immortal. His suffering was transformed into architecture for other people to shelter in.
Which moves us from the theoretical to the intensely practical, I think. We've explored the ancient theology, the modern ICU experience, the grand narrative shift. But what are the actual principles? What does the listener take away and actually apply to their own life based on these sources?
Yeah, what do you do when you are in your own dark night of the soul and you can't read ahead to the end of your own diary? Based on our sources, we have two core principles for believers facing this kind of darkness.
Principle 1, as explicitly drawn from both texts. When tribulation comes, the godly keep praying.
They keep praying. It sounds almost aggressively simple, like a bumper sticker, but look at the extreme examples we just studied. It's not about praying a polite prayer before dinner. Randy was floating in a sensory-deprived, memory-wiped hallucination on the edge of septic shock, and his instinct was to cry out to the Lord to free his captive spirit. Heman was a pariah, physically falling apart, convinced God was actively trying to drown him, and his instinct was to confront God with a prayer every single morning.
The key distinction the source makes is this. They do not accept their demise as final. This is the psychological hallmark of the believer's resilience in these texts. The circumstances scream finality. The medical monitors beep a certain way. The friends stop calling. The spiritual feelings evaporate completely. They all suggest the story's completely over. The grave is won. But the godly refuse to accept that physical data as the final conclusion.
They argue with the silence. They refuse to concede the narrative to the dark.
They argue with the silence. And this leads directly to principle 2, which is the theological bedrock of everything we've discussed today. The source text makes a definitive declaration. For those in Christ Jesus, darkness is never the final word. God has the final say.
Darkness is never the final word. And to anchor this, our source brings in a New Testament framework. It points to the book of Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. I really want to read this carefully because it fundamentally redefines where a believer's life is actually located. Therefore, if you have been raised with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Keep thinking about things above, not things on the earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you too will be revealed in glory with him.
This passage is an absolute paradigm shift regarding vulnerability. Let's look really closely at verse 3. For you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. This entirely redefines the concept of survival. If your core life, your true essence, is hidden with Christ in God, it is completely secure in a realm that the darkness of Sheol, or a staph infection, or social abandonment simply cannot access.
It's the ultimate secure server. It's like having your most valuable assets, your identity, stored in a vault that is completely off the grid. A local bank robbery, like a physical illness, might clear out the cash register up front, but the actual vault is impervious. Your true life is hidden away. And I want to connect this back to Randy Johnson's poem because there is a perfect synergy here. At the very end of his testimony, he reflects on the aftermath of his terrifying experience. He says, maybe it was all just a dream, but man, it eclipsed those drugs and made me stronger than I seem. In the inner man, that's my plug.
The inner man. That is a brilliant articulation of the Colossians concept. Randy's physical man was utterly decimated. He was shivering in immense pain. His memory was compromised. He literally couldn't write his own name. The outer man was failing. But his inner man, that part of him that instinctively cried out to God in the dark, was actually made stronger by the encounter.
The outer man is vulnerable to the staph infection. The inner man is hidden with Christ.
Exactly. This perfectly aligns with the promise in Colossians. The external earthly circumstances might be collapsing entirely, but the true life is hidden and secure. The Colossians text promises that when Christ appears, the believer will be revealed in glory. And true deliverance takes multiple forms. For Randy, true deliverance in that specific hospital room meant physical healing. He woke up, the staff didn't kill him, and he lived to write the poem.
But physical healing isn't always the immediate outcome, as Heman's prolonged, agonizing wait shows us. We don't know how long Heman sat in the dark before the dawn broke. True deliverance might mean ultimate spiritual revelation on the other side of death. The core principle drawn from these sources isn't a guarantee of a pain-free, perfectly resolved life on earth.
No, it isn't. It is the guarantee that the believer's life is securely hidden away, permanently safe from the ultimate darkness of Sheol. It is the absolute assurance that apparent rejection by God is never actual rejection.
So let me talk directly to you listening to this right now. We don't know what kind of dark night you might be walking through today. Maybe you are sitting in a waiting room waiting on a terrifying medical test. Maybe you feel completely socially abandoned by friends who just didn't know how to handle your grief, so they quietly walked away. Or maybe you are doing everything right. You are praying, you are seeking, you are reading, and you are just feeling absolute crushing silence from the sky. The action plan, based on the survival mechanics of these profound sources, is exactly the same. Keep crying out. Do not accept your demise as final. Argue with the silence if you have to.
Because your current chapter is not the end of the book.
Exactly. We've covered incredible ground today. We've journeyed from Heman's ancient, desperate courtroom plea in Psalm 88, navigated the terrifying sensory void of Randy's modern trip to Sheol, and ultimately arrived at the profound truth that your life, if you are a believer, is hidden away where the darkness simply cannot reach it.
It is a profound framework for enduring the unendurable.
Before we wrap up, I want to land the plane with a final thought. We always try to extract one lingering idea for you to mull over. What is the ultimate takeaway from these texts that we haven't explicitly stated yet?
Well, I want to extrapolate purely from the timeline of Heman's life that we just analyzed. Think about this structurally. Heman's absolute darkest moment, the specific time he felt most forgotten, most completely ignored, most socially isolated, and utterly useless to God, was actually the exact moment he was generating a text that God would use to comfort millions of people over thousands of years. The words he literally screamed into a silent void became sacred scripture.
It's incredible to think about.
So for you listening right now, what if the season of your life where you feel the most invisible, the most trapped, and the most unproductive is actually the very material being used for your greatest legacy in a story you just can't read yet?
What a thought to end on. If you're stuck in the dark, you might just be writing the survival guide that someone else is going to need to survive theirs. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the dark night of the soul. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep arguing with the silence if you have to. We'll catch you on the next one.